and welcome to West Wales. And it is the most glorious evening here. We've had a couple of days where it's done nothing but rain and blow an absolute hoolie. So it's an absolute delight to have a day when we can actually come down and have a walk and not feel like we might get blown to Ireland. Probably can't see this, but it looks like there are some people fishing at the end of the causeway. Don't get anything particularly exotic off this causeway. Occasionally you get bass, but actually these days I think you have to put them back. Quite a lot of dogfish, get the occasional eel. But I think our sea fishing days are behind us, we've decided. So Andrew just finds with his various paint issues that it's just too difficult. So he takes photographs instead. And I enjoyed sea fishing, but I'm perfectly happy just to go for a walk, especially when the scenery looks like this. Well, the light is going fast, so we're going to walk back to Andrew and back home, and I guess I will see you tomorrow. The weather's really good and it's probably going to rain a bit this afternoon, so I'm going to do some gardening. And I thought, well, I haven't actually done a garden tour for quite a long time, so I'll do that as well. I've got some bulbs to plant up and some more things for the wild garden, so why don't you come along and see what I'm up to? I'm trying to keep the sun out of my eyes because the sun is just there. Okay, now the cunning plan today is that I'm going to plant bulbs. In order to plant bulbs where I want to plant them, I actually need to plant up some primulas that came as little plug plants, and they're going out in the garden. And then in the pots that I had the plug plants in, I want to put some dwarf daffodils. So I have been to the shops. I saw those, they came from the garden centre, and then I was up in Fishguard at the library today. Got those, and then some anemones, and you'll have to excuse the state of my fingernails, I have been gardening without gloves on. And these anemones are going to go in the wildlife garden, or what we call the wildlife garden, or I suppose you could call it a pollinators garden rather than wildlife. I mean, we do have the bird feeders in here, so that is wildlife as well, isn't it? So that's the plan. It's quite windy in the garden, so how much I'll actually be able to record of me talking to you, might have to do a voiceover, because I do have to do that if it's really windy, because there's just too much noise on the film. Anyway, let's turn the camera around and get going. So this strip here is about sort of 8 foot by, I don't know, maybe 20 foot, and it's quite shady. It sort of has the woodland in the distance, and this is the area where we don't mow it in the summer, and we've been naturalising it with bulbs, and that's where the anemones are going in here, somewhere here. And also you can see there's fork handles, and they're actually for the birds to perch on, so Andrew can sit in his office in his homemade bird hide and actually take photographs of the birds. And I don't know whether you're going to be able to see the birds. There are birds flitting about, little blue tits. The dog considers them to be her enemies, so she does bark at them quite often, but she's quite mellow at the moment because it's sunny and, you know, we're all quite mellow. Anemone blander, mixed packet, and I'm just going to plant them here so they are close to the edge, so they're good for photographs. We can see them, and you can see they are little corms. They're little corms, and they kind of, I don't know, look a bit like sort of, I don't know, rabbit droppings or something. I mean, they're not. I hope they're not. Anyway, that would be a good con, wouldn't it? Selling you corms, and actually they were rabbit droppings. Plants like anemones and daffodils are extremely important for pollinators very early in the season. Quite often you'll see the occasional bumblebee flitting by in about February, and so to have some plants that are going to be flowering for them is really important. each year we've been here, we've added more and more bulbs and wildflowers to this area, and we're finally getting to the point where there's going to be not so much grass and more flowers, and they're everything from annuals, bulbs to biennials and perennials. Bulbs do really well in pots, and if you're limited on space, it can be a really great way to have a fantastic display. We tend to put them on the table so that they are like living floral decorations for when we sit outside and enjoy our coffee. One of the varieties I've chosen is Tate, and it's a very early flowering narcissi or miniature daffodil, and it's ideal for those queen bumblebees who come out of hibernation in late January, early February. They've actually got somewhere where they can get some nectar and some pollen, so they can survive until they start the nesting process, and all their little worker bees will start to go out into the countryside and collect nectar and pollen for them, and therefore continuing the cycle of life. All these bulbs are quite small, so these shallow pots are going to work fine. If you've got a full-size daffodil, then you need to plant it quite deep, but these miniatures like to be near the surface, so a shallow pot will be perfect for them. I like to plant uneven numbers of bulbs, so 3s or 5s or 7s or 9s, and I think that can be a very pleasing look. I love to use containers that didn't necessarily start their life as something for the garden. We have an old metal water tank that I pulled out of a skip in Bristol. We have an old weaner feeding container that we used to use in one of our pens when we farmed in Somerset. Plus I was gifted a fantastic big iron pot that had rusted through at the bottom. It had started life cooking school dinners. I call my style of gardening a cottage style garden, although I don't live in a 400-year-old cottage, and I don't think you need to in order to enjoy this very informal style of gardening. We always try and choose plants that are ideal for pollinators, plus they bring colour to our lives and are inspirations for both our artworks. I like to paint them and Andrew likes to photograph them. But most of all, I just love to potter in the garden. It relaxes me and all the troubles of the day will just drift away. I think when people talk about bee-friendly gardens, they're often thinking about bumblebees and maybe honeybees, but there are lots of other insects that are really important pollinators, and so we need to plant for them as well. Butterflies and moths and even those naughty little wasps are very key to keeping a healthy ecosystem within your garden. Cottage gardens give you the opportunity to grow food and herbs and flowers all in quite a small space, and I think the birds and the bees and the butterflies really appreciate this style of gardening too. This is the oxeye daisy that I just lifted out the back garden, and I'm actually going to split it, and it sort of is coming apart. I'm going to split it into several plants and then put it in the pollinators garden. She says that actually this doesn't want to split. There's also a bit of self-heal, and I'm just going to leave that in there. Well, it's split into two. I thought it was going to split into more, but there you go. Plants for free. There are no rules telling you how you must have a garden, what it must look like. So just let your imagination run wild. But I think it's very important just to keep those pollinating insects at the back of your mind whenever you're planting. And the RHS has a little symbol on plants that is a bumblebee that will tell you it's good for pollinators. One of the things that attracted us to this house and this garden was that it had ready-made raised beds. And as you are probably aware, Andrew is a wheelchair user. So we wanted a garden that was going to work for him as a wheelchair user and me as an able-bodied person. I was lucky enough to take some permaculture classes back in the early 2000s, and it's really helped me to design this garden with multi-purposes. A simple thing such as using your vertical spaces to grow herbs can extend your growing space, and it's so simple and so effective. We've had several raised beds and planters built just so we can grow a little bit of our own food in our back garden. One of the reasons we've got such a great microclimate in this garden is because we're set down from the road, and sort of up behind me, that's a very steep bank, and that goes up to road level. And it is a little bit tricky to garden up there. You do sort of need crampons and climbing ropes. So we are fairly happy to just let it go a little bit wild. One of the latest additions to the garden are these wisteria that are eventually going to climb up there. But next to this, with this wonderful shuttlecock fern, so sculptural. And then our edible hedge, which is guava berries, wild plums, rosemaries and a crabapple. And then sort of down here where you can actually garden without having to have climbing equipment, we have some lovely sedum and marjoram, and then various other sort of wild self-seeded things. We come round here, just got the last of the rhubarb. This is the area we've been working on a lot. This is the wildlife garden, pollinator garden. I can't decide what we're calling it. Anyway, there it is. And we are just slowly adding to it a mixture of perennials and bulbs and annuals. Just all things that are going to attract pollinators and birds into the area. This is where I was growing the woad, and now has overwintering onions in it, which are just starting to sprout, next to what eventually will be quite a big tree, and then probably we won't be growing things underneath it. So it's a mountain ash, and it's done really well. It was a tiny little seedling when we got it, but it's growing up nicely. More of these boxes up here. Leeks doing quite well, more overwintering onions in there. So my next job is to walk the dog again. So I look forward to seeing you in a few days, and hopefully I might actually get some sewing done. So until then, bye bye.